Hi, you're listening to On the Payroll, a podcast about project management, leadership, consulting, CRM such as Salesforce and Microsoft CRM, and all manner of things related to leadership, teamwork, and these are the kind of topics that I really enjoy. In today's episode, I talked to Richard Clark, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Provar Testing. We talk primarily about QA and testing, which are just one of my favorite subjects. And it was really interesting delving into his career path, how he got to where he is now, his space in the Salesforce ecosystem, and how he entered it so early on, and what he learned along the way. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Hello, Richard. Welcome to my podcast on the payroll. How are you today?
Hi, Pei. I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm very good. I'm quite excited about this. We've not spoken for a while, even though we've worked together at Make Positive, where we first met, and then asynchronously at Capgemini, which was...
Oh, yes. I'd forgotten that.
That's right.
More of a baton change, that one, wasn't it?
Indeed, it was. You are now CTO of Provar.
Not quite. I'm Chief Technology Innovation Officer now. So that was a change back in February.
Okay, I will ask you about that in a minute, in quite a few minutes. But I think just looking at your career history on LinkedIn, it is very long and very kind of prestigious in a way when I'm eyeballing it. I would like it if you can just narrate to us the story of how you get to where you are today.
Wow, that is a long story. I'll begin at the beginning, which is writing games as a teenager back in the 80s on home computers. The days when you had to, if you wanted to sending a listing, you had to type out the typewriter if you didn't have a printer. Most people didn't have printers then. And if you wanted to install a game, you took it from a magazine, you typed in all the code, and you hopefully got it to work. So that I probably learned debugging before I learned coding in many ways. Because before I learned to code, I learned to debug someone else's. So that was quite an interesting thing. Fast forward through computer science university, didn't learn much about programming there, unfortunately, but learned things, data modeling, aspects, networks, comms, that sort of thing. And early access to email with the old Janet at the university computer networks back in the late 80s, early 90s. So we were using email about 10 years before everyone else. Didn't know it was called email then. So I went through a career of a number of companies, and I've had a lot of work working with software houses, consulting companies. So I've worked with lots of big name brands, mainly in the UK. And through that experience, a lot of the times what I implemented was a CRM, but I didn't know it was called a CRM at the time. It was called prospecting, or it was called a customer registration system, and had no idea, never even heard the acronym CRM until many years later. And then around 2007, I was fortunate to be invited to join a startup which two friends had formed. And the idea was to be the next Salesforce. That was the plan. So we're going to do product development. Product's always been at my heart. We're going to develop our own products, not for CRM, but to rival that. And we went through a number of ideas, but we quickly needed to raise some money. So we started doing Atlassian implementations for customers. So we're doing Confluence and Jira type systems of people writing plugins for that. We thought that was going to be our moment then. And then we did a Salesforce project, with the implementation project for a customer in Chelmsford. And out of that, it was at the time when Apex first hit the scene. Suddenly no more S controls. S controls were still around, but we were trying to get away from them. And I started getting involved with the Salesforce ISV team about building applications on the platform as well. So that was my first App Exchange app there. And that company was BrightGen, who we all know today as a UK Platinum partner. I was fortunate there to recruit a very talented individual who scraped past my Java Enterprise Edition exam, called Keir Bowden, and said to him, do some certifications, get on the forums, get yourself known, free marketing, and he took that and went for it in spades, as we say. So he's completely dominated and been a huge contributor to the ecosystem. And I've been a bit of a journeyman, as you say, going through various companies, working at various end customers, again, implementing Salesforce, helping customers build products on Salesforce, and lots of applications. And that includes both the larger global system integrators like Capgemini and other smaller partners like Make Positive, you mentioned as well. Ultimately, it led me to a path in 2013 at Make Positive when I met a guy called Geraint Waters and Paul Nofke, who had an idea around an app they wanted to build for testing based on their experience at the company they were at. And it was quite an early experience, and they asked my advice, and I said, okay, if you're building, you don't want to build an IDE, so use Eclipse, because Force.com IDE was using Eclipse. If you're going to test Salesforce, don't use the UI, because I'm looking at US and this UI keeps changing. These locators, I do something, then the page changes and it's broken. Why is that? And I explain why. So I said there's this thing called metadata, and it's metadata API. And that got the ball rolling with the guys at Provar. And in 2014, Make Positive had finished incubating the project, and the guys were able to launch on their own company's Provar and take some resources out in Gowan in India as well. And then I sort of looped back with those guys. I was a customer twice. And then in 2017, I was between roles contracting. It was after Dreamforce, and Geraint phoned me up. I'd just come back from accepting a job as a developer somewhere doing Lightning component development. And Geraint said to me, how would you like to join Provar? And that's where I am today.
Wow, that's quite an interesting journey. It sounds like product development and getting your hands dirty has been what's driven you. If I look at the kind of roles that you've picked up, is that still something you're doing? Are you still coding at your level?
So yes and no. So I'm actually working on a new product for Provar at the moment. And it's no secret, it's in the test management space. So it's the ability to have a history of all your test executions, but actually also plan what you're going to test, why you're going to test it. And the purpose of doing that is then you'll be able to measure and talk about the outcomes and make sure you're checking your test results against what you plan to test, rather than just saying it worked. You say, yeah, that worked, but was that what we were supposed to test? It's quite important. And I'm building that declaratively myself, because I feel I understand it's quicker to do that than prototype it or use mocking up tools. But I'm actually using an old colleague of ours who's now joined us, Kamal. He's going to be doing the LWC components. So today I was doing the designs for those LWC components.
Okay, can we just take one step back? So for any of our listeners who are not familiar with Provar, can you just share a little bit about what the flagship products are and what the other products that you've just been talking about would do?
Sure. So Provar is the first and only testing product built for Salesforce. We've been successful enough that people start to try and imitate what we do. And what Provar solves is the problem that with Salesforce, you have 3 releases per year that are mandatory. You can't stay on Salesforce, spring 20, you have to upgrade. There's no holding back option. So customers are forced into a 3 times a year change cycle. The other thing customers experience is that generally Salesforce projects are very agile. And we'll talk more about Agile, I'm sure, in a few minutes, because it's probably our favorite topic. And that means there's lots of change happening. And when your Salesforce was just used by your sales team or just your customer service team, the impact of a bug was probably not a big financial risk. But now we have websites running on Provar. We have e-commerce applications. Sorry, not running Provar, running on Salesforce. We have e-commerce applications. So what Provar does in essence is allow people to build test suites using a declarative approach. So point and click to build both UI and API tests. So you can test your end-to-end business processes, and then you can choose how you want to run those. Do I run that every time I make a change? Do I want to run that every time I do a deployment? Or do I just want to run that every day to make sure there's no bugs in production, that our business processes are working?
I see. That sounds quite comprehensive. What kind of... So when I was working at Make Positive, we were looking at rolling that out for one of my clients that was a project in flight. And there were a few reasons why we didn't take it on. One of which was obviously budget. It wasn't something that client had been prepared for, because the cost of it is different in that for that particular project, we had scoped to have a manual tester as an example. But what we found was we had underestimated the amount of testing that had to be done. And every release just made it a bit more difficult. So we looked at Provar, and one of the reasons why we found that it wasn't suitable at that time was, one, was budget, and number two, there was a lot of change that was going on. So can you share some thoughts about where Provar is suitable for organizations at which step of their journey in terms of coming on board Salesforce and utilizing it within their roadmap?
Okay. Firstly, your example is not unique. It's probably the majority, probably over 90% of projects do that. People underestimate testing. They leave testing to the end. It's the first thing to get squeezed. Or we've all done projects where, what do we do for testing? We call it UAT, and we hand over the implementation, the sandbox, straight over to the customer and say, you test it. And we don't help them. Sometimes we help them with test scripts. We tell them what they need to test, but they don't know what we've already tested. So that's been a problem in the past. So how Provar can help customers most is when you're doing a greenfield Salesforce implementation, you usually have a very high engagement with the business. People are very interested in what you're doing. You may be doing it quite interactively, very true Agile. When I started doing Salesforce, we were doing everything in production. We didn't always have a sandbox. That wasn't an option. And so we were building as we went on a daily workshop basis, and people were then able to use the system then and there. I mean, it was truly agile that days after our licenses arrived, people were entering real data into production. Then, of course, what happens is you start getting a change request, as you said. So that change request, you think, oh, that'll take me 3 days. But those 3 days might affect the lead object, might affect your marketing automation, might stop a validation rule firing. So suddenly you need to think about the impact on everything else. And that's the payback of Provar, is that what we call the regression gap. So people always plan for what they have to do. They don't always size what they need to test. So companies will benefit and get a very quick return on their investment in tools like Provar if they can plan ahead and know what they need to do. The other important thing is, if you are doing this with a manual testers are excellent at one thing, or especially one thing. They're excellent at exploratory testing. They're excellent at finding things that the developer didn't think of, the architect didn't think of, the business analyst didn't think of, the customer didn't think of. They find gaps. That's what their real skill is, a good manual tester. So making them do any kind of go to this page, fill out these 7 fields and hit return is a waste of their skills. You can automate all that boring stuff. You don't automate 100%. You automate the boring things, repetitive tasks, the things that have to work. And then you let your manual testers focus on the what if scenarios. So what if I hit cancel halfway through this? Will it save it? What if I don't enter that line item? What's going to happen? What if I change the status of that order? What if I set the opportunity to close lost at the second stage, not the last stage? And that's what exploratory testing is good at still. And that will always continue.
I see. So if someone's looking at a project then, or to begin using Salesforce in their organization, is what I'm hearing, test automation is something that you would only use for regression testing, and therefore after go live and during your 3 yearly release, or is there room for it within a larger transformation program?
Yeah, you definitely want to be thinking of it as early as you can. So the difficult point is, at what point of that project do you have a stable enough development that it's worth investing your time in automating the tests? And the traditional way of automating tests was with code. So when you consider a tool like Salesforce, you can have a bunch of functional consultants or admins making changes, creating flows, creating page layouts, dynamic forms, lots of great work they can do, process builder, whatever. And then you employ a developer, a high cost resource, to test it worked. Doesn't make sense. There's no payoff doing that. So what's really important is to use a tool which is also declarative, that maybe that admin or that functional consultant can also use to create tests as they go. Because as you know, we write unit tests for Apex code, but we don't write unit tests for a flow or a process or for a validation rule. Using tools like Provar, if you identify that point where you have your baseline, maybe your MVP, which may not be your release candidate, your first release candidate, but your MVP, then you can start building those tests successfully. The other thing you can do is you don't have to start with UI testing. So using the Salesforce API, it's very quick. Immediately you can create tests at the API level. So what I mean by that is for every data table, every S object in Salesforce, there's automatically an API that can be used to create, read, update, or delete records. And using a tool like Provar, within seconds, you can create a test that mimics that, take some test data, fire it in, and check the result. So you can definitely use that from the start. To your second point about the value of it, it is for using every day. So regression is certainly one task, but the way you build your regression pack-up is by building your system tests up throughout the process. What I referred to earlier with our new test manager product is about making sure that we also record at the start of the project what your test strategy is, what your test plan is, what are the things that need to be tested. Because understanding what to test is probably what most of our customers suffer from most, is they don't understand what needs to be tested. And some testers don't understand Salesforce. They're testing the wrong thing. They're testing, does a list view work? If I search a list view, does it find a record? You don't need to test that. Salesforce already tested that. You need to test your customizations.
So what would the proper strategy be then? If we are looking, so let's pick up a hypothetical situation where you've got a client who's engaged a partner to implement Sales and Service Cloud and potentially rolling it out globally and with more integrations with maybe language and currency to think of later on. At what point and how should this organization begin to think about the test automation strategy for such a big implementation?
I think you should think about it in the definition stage of your project. You should definitely have already for it in terms of resources, tools you want to use. And if anyone's thinking of, say, employing developers to do testing, please talk to Provar. Okay. At that point, there's always an ROI to pay back as soon as you're thinking about employing a developer to do test. The larger projects, for sure, it's easy to see that you need to do test automation. There's a business value, a business risk you can normally attach to that. For smaller projects, if you're going to do a greenfield Salesforce implementation or a non-profit implementation, 10 users, it clearly doesn't make sense if you've got 10 users to be doing test automation unless something is so critical that you need the business value. And in that case, it may not be UI testing. You just need to have some APIs that are running, and you could probably script that using data loader and a few tools. So testing is always required. Whether you need Provar or not is a trade-off between the cost of the product and making sure you get that payback within the acceptable time frame.
Okay, it sounds like something that is missed, as you mentioned. Where budget and timeline is concerned, the two things that get missed the most is testing and project management. So I tend to have those sort of conversations with the clients quite a bit. In terms of, let's just go back to your the path that you've taken and your career journey. It looks as if you have stayed quite a lot in the contracting side of things as opposed to on permanent with an organization. Is there a reason for that?
That's a great question. I didn't realize I had. I mean, I spent probably 7 years at the first company I was at in Colchester, going from a junior developer to the software manager. I then went contracting pretty much through the whole of the 90s. 90s was a great time in the UK for contractors. It was a tax efficient way of turning £30,000 a year into about £28,000 in your pocket. For the right reasons, a lot of those tax, not evasion, avoidance, which is the legal version. All those tax schemes are now largely gone, and we have IR35, the demon. So the reason I'm not contracting anymore, IR35 plays a big part in that. The reason I was contracting it was because of that dynamic nature of actually, I choose what projects I work on. When your listeners, viewers, maybe working for system integrator, you don't always get a choice. So you may be sent somewhere you don't want to go. We both know that experience. And you may be there 3 months and it's not the job you thought you were going to be doing. And while you're adding value for that customer and you're adding value on that account, it may not be the thing that most interests you. So being a contractor for me gave me that opportunity of going in somewhere without worrying about what the project was. I'll start the project, deliver everything I need to do in 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe extend. But if I was then finding there was no challenge left or project wasn't available, I was very comfortable moving on or taking a break when needed.
So here's a question that I think about quite a bit. One of which is when you're working with a partner or a GSI, you have the benefit of a standardized ways of working. Most of the time, that standard is of a reasonable level. There's best practices around what you can do, what you should do, around security, and so on and so forth. When you are contracting, and you might be contracting as a staff augmentation for the partner or directly with the client, you don't have that. And you are basically in with whoever thinks the best way of doing a specific thing is going to do. In your experience, how often do you see projects that are run well along with the methodology, the development, and the testing, and providing a robust solution versus, so we know a lot of organizations, they've got internal landscape and politics around how change is managed, where those sort of environments and situations don't result in the kind of quality system that you hope to achieve?
I mean, that's a very difficult question. So if I take the last consulting engagement I had was for a UK satellite telco company, and they were going through a digital transformation internally. So they had a monopoly. Their monopoly was being eroded by new players in the market. And they were having to change their business, but they invested in a team to educate around things like Six Sigma, to educate people about process. And so they hired a Scrum coach or several Scrum coaches who I was fortunate to work with. And those people were really, really important in educating the end users, those real people who really use the system, usually sales operations in most companies I've worked at, the people that really understand how everything works and understand what the exceptions are and what's normal. The challenge there has always been the senior managers and why should I pay for that? Why do I need to do it that way? And getting the engagement level. So it is very, very difficult at those end customers where you don't have that champion of that digital transformation. And at that location, we were working alongside some large GSIs who were doing that, and they were perceived to be slower than us coming in with my own team of 5. We were doing things. And in fact, we had some comments that the business were a bit worried because we kept delivering on time. And they were like, we're not used to this. That's not supposed to happen. It's supposed to be delayed. That's what normally happens. I've booked a holiday for the release date. You gave me a release date, so I booked a holiday knowing it would definitely not be that date. I'm like, well, that's not the way I work. I might not have shipped 100% of what you wanted, but I'd rather ship 90% working than make you wait longer. That's the point of Agile. Give you something working now that's complete, and then you can have the rest later. Anyway, so there is definitely a trade-off. I think also, I need to be very careful about this, but not all of those large SIs or even small SIs do have all those right ways of working.
I agree.
And some of that can be down to whether they're a boutique that have specialized in that one product and they've got very lean processes, or maybe it's the same process whether you're doing SAP or Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow. So there can be trouble with things like that. And I went on some early projects back in the early 2010, I think it was 2011. And it was a partner who was mainly a SAP partner. And they planned a 2-year Salesforce implementation in the Netherlands. And we were like, how's it 2 years? And I was actually on the governance for that. I was saying, this is crazy. Why is it taking 2 years to do this? But they had a process. It was almost SSADM. They had a process, they had a methodology they were following, but obviously what it was going to deliver at the end of that 2 years was going to be out of date. Salesforce moves too quick. You can't make technology decisions in a waterfall manner 2 years in advance, because you're dead in the water if you do that.
So this segues really nicely into methodology that we talked about. So let me put my stand forward, and then we can have a discussion about it. My point of view is that Agile works a lot better with a product company, or if you're internal, in the way that you've talked about, you've got your team and you're delivering internally versus them engaging a partner. Whereas if you are engaging a partner, it can't quite be Agile, because then there is accountability issues and that sort of thing. How do you see things?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the trouble is Agile is about the ability to change things and deliver something early, and that's what we talked about already. But with customers, when you've got a contractual relationship, no, this is what you agreed. This is what we signed off for this amount of money by this date. So there's no flexibility, but they need flexibility. That's the whole reason you're doing things Agile, because their business will change. They need to do new things. When you start to change that, once that document's issued, any changes to that have an impact. You can't just swap things out for free. You can't take out 5 points and put 5 points in, because there's thinking time, there's design, there's all the other points that have to be done. And I think that's been a misrepresentation of Agile, that it's so easy to swap things out. When you're a product company, you're not working off that scope. What you're working off is a backlog of changes, and you've got product managers prioritizing and shifting things in that backlog. So what we're really changing when we do product development Provar is we're moving things up and down that backlog. We don't change what's in sprint, because that's been committed to and it's already been designed. We could affect what happens in the sprint plus one. But businesses, it needs to be now, it needs to be my way or the highway. So it can be very, very challenging. And I do feel, I wouldn't want to go back to consulting for that reason. It would be a challenge to go back and have to remember that you can't do that.
Okay. I've got a really, I'd like to ask a question that's been on my mind though, when you talk about product development and Agile. What about technical debt? So I know of one consulting client who had gone full Agile, but they went in it with the eyes wide open. They wanted to learn. The journey was what they wanted. The journey of discovery and the learning, plus the final product, not just the final product. So I believe what happened was they got to the end, they got what they wanted. I can't remember how long that project was. It wasn't my project. But there was a very candid conversation about, if we had designed it what we wanted upfront, which they didn't know at that point in time, the cost would have been less than half. And they wouldn't have had the amount of technical debt of all the changes that they took. And so that was quite interesting that they came away with that point of view. However, from a product delivery point of view, how do you deal with technical debt of the changes? Do you refactor at every set date, say, let's now have a look at what we've accumulated and let's look at fixing that? Or how do you manage that sort of things?
So if I can mention on the first point you said, is quite interesting, because people think Agile is somehow cheaper. And I would always say Agile is more expensive. You're trading cost against the ability to have something early and the ability to have flexibility. That's what it provides. It is definitely not cheaper. How we handle technical debt is we have to run vulnerability scans on our product on a regular basis. We use several third-party libraries. We wouldn't, code everything from scratch. We have Chrome updates that happen all the time. We have Salesforce releases that happen all the time. Each of those is creating technical debt. So we have technical debt that falls into it must always be part of the next sprint. So there's always a Chrome beta version. We're always working on the technical debt for anything that introduces, anything that deprecates. We're always working. We're already working on, I'm lost track now, winter 22. So we get access long before other Salesforce partners as part of something called Monorail. So we're working on winter 22 compatibility at the moment. That's already in our backlog. That's a commitment we make. We have to have that compatibility to give customers that promise, that guarantee that tests they write in Provar will keep running, even if Salesforce change something from Aura to Lightning or change the DOM rendering, as we say, for field. But we also have things that are more longer term, like Java upgrades. They happen more slowly, and long-term stable releases every few years. So we just have to plan those in our roadmap. And I always liken it to when we're doing our release planning is we could fill our bucket or our glass with sand of lots of little things customers want and a few bugs in here and whatever. We have to have balance. Or we can take a few big rocks, put them in the bucket first, and we fill up around it with sand. And that's my preferred way of working, is we take those big rocks and we have a trade-off between the new feature sometimes or resolving or mitigating some technical debt that we can see coming or has already arrived.
Okay, that sounds like a good way of doing it, because my head was, oh my God, how do you do that? It's a quite nice structured way that you're doing that. So I know that you've got a team out in Gurgaon, and you've got a team here. How do you manage both teams and make sure that it's as tight as if they were all co-located, especially when you're doing Agile?
Yeah, I've got to say, it's become harder with COVID, of course. So key to our success before was going out and meeting the team twice a year, building that personal relationship that all teams need. You don't have time for people to have cultural differences or misread reactions to things. And I'm a big proponent of Slack, that actually people not using emojis can be terrible at times. If I say something I think maybe controversial, I must remember to put a smiley on the end, because I could upset a whole team just with a flippant comment about a joke about developers. Why don't developers look out the window in the morning? Because they'll have nothing to do in the afternoon. It's a joke. Okay. So I need to make sure those things are communicated. Actually, our problem's worse than that. We actually have quite a lot of staff in the US now. So we have around 30 staff in the US in 4-5 time zones, I think. So it actually becomes quite difficult. So there was a moment when my working day sort of started at 8 and finished at 8. I managed to shift. My change in roles meant I've more dealt with the US and Europe now. And that's really how we've done things. We've redivided some of the roles, and we have certain people in our product and engineering teams. But we put engineering management in India as well. So the person responsible for that, Kamal, is in charge of the engineering team rather than me now being responsible. That gives us an extra 4.5 hours of overlap per day. Our staff are also very flexible in their working hours. So our staff in India will generally start around 10 o'clock. Unfortunately, some of them will finish at 10 o'clock, which I'm not happy about. So we need to fix the problem of people working long hours, but we also have a overnight shift. So for our customer service, we have a team who have been hired for the purpose of working from home. Weirdly, that was part of the contract, but working those extra hours, working those midnight hours for India, which cover parts of Europe and the US and Australia.
Australia as well. So it's
we have
now
Australia as well, but no staff. Our furthest east staff, one of the guys is in Singapore. So yeah.
Oh, it sounds like it's grown a lot more than I last.
It has. I think we've grown 30% in staff numbers this year alone.
How are you? So you mentioned before COVID, you went out twice a year to India. How are you pulling the global team together and make it? So what I find that small companies are very good with the culture thing because it's easy. And as it grows, it becomes so much more difficult. And I think you and I lived through that change, the company we were at. But that was all located in India. And now you've got a situation where you're global. How do you find a way to make sure that the human connection is there and it's not just transactional? Because it can easily go down that path. You're working these hours, you're talking to the customer, and there's not so much of the human connection. How do you plan to?
I don't think we've solved it. We still have a way to go on that. And because we've gone from being a small company to over 130 staff now, And to say the staff in the US, staff in India, there's no overlap in their working day normally. So we rely on things like Slack to have that asynchronous messaging, that communication. We rely on internal company newsletters, old hat. We rely on our company all hands meeting, which, India stay up late for, US come on early for, those that are on the West Coast. So we rely on those mechanisms of people being flexible with their time in order to have some level. But the way in terms of the engineering team I've handled it is to have special days. So last November, I think it was, we had a window where I was able to break our sprint pattern and have a 1 week no sprint, which I think is really important for the engineering team to get some downtime and do some self-learning. And in that time, I scheduled what we called an engineering day. So we had fun and games, we had talks, we had our own mini Dreamforce, and it just was down to the people to present what was it they're interested in. Tell me your call for papers, what your idea is. I'll make sure there's no overlap, and off you go and present. And it was incredibly successful. But what was really good is using the different online tools and playing agile games like my morning routine. You've probably done that one before. Was really, really good for our Scrum Master and getting people to be more open and communicative about what they do without anyone judging them. Because, whether you have toast before or after you brush your teeth really isn't something anyone can criticize anyone else for. It's personal preference.
Oh, that sounds like quite a fun no sprint week.
Yeah, we'll definitely do more, I hope. Definitely like to see more of that.
Okay. So you talked about this test manager module you're working on. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm quite interested. What does that mean?
Probably what most people have come across is ALM, HPLM evolved now, Micro Focus. So it's a product that lets people capture both defects around their and user stories, I suppose you could say, but it quite predates all of that, around what they plan to do, but also capture what they plan to test. So a key part of that is to make sure, as I say, that when you say you're going to test something, you've captured evidence for it as well. And what Test Manager really does is extend. Provar's very good at the test results and give you a history, give you a nice report at the end of it, gives you evidence. And we already hook that back into Salesforce, into a free app exchange app for you to have a history of results and dashboards. What Test Manager does is extends that by, say, measuring what you plan to test, but it also gives you a nice point to hook in your Copado or your Flowsum or whatever you're using for release management. Deloitte have their own excellent application as well for it. So it lets you hook those processes in and have more governance around what's going on and what was done, and allows you to look back and say, okay, so the opportunity management module, we have breakages every release. Why is that? Is it because our tests aren't robust enough? Are we doing lots of changes, breaking changes, or is the quality of our delivery not good enough? So it lets you be able to ask those questions. Why is that? It's not going to tell you the answers. Okay. I'm sure you could take all the data, feed it into Tableau CRM, and it will spit you out a more detailed answer. But there is nothing out there. There's no machine learning algorithm of everyone's data, nor should there be, in my opinion, that's going to tell you a magic answer every time. Customers don't like to share data.
No, I can imagine why. So that's the thing that you're currently working on. Is that something that excites you?
Yes, I've always liked building apps for Salesforce. There's several I've built that have never seen the light of day. And I had someone email me about my first app last week, 2 weeks ago now, and it's a revenue scheduling app. And then weirdly, within Provar, we had a discussion this week around multi-year deals and how we track that and how you measure ACV versus, total deal size, total contract value versus annual recurring revenue. And I think, do you know what? I must have solved this umpteen times in umpteen engagements elsewhere. And I wrote a product for it 10 years ago. And I've had to say, maybe I've got to dust that off. So yeah, product has always been exciting because I like that, especially with Salesforce, the ability to write something very quickly. You asked me earlier about, do I code? Yes, actually, I wrote an Apex class yesterday and I had trouble getting it to save and making changes. And I thought, actually, I need to make sure I use all the latest notations. I've got to make sure I use all the latest accessibility rules because it's going through security review. The checks are much, much harder. And I thought, well, I should use something like Clayton. Remember Lorenzo's app? I can use Clayton to help me do this. So I still like to code and do development, but there are people better at it than me. I would much rather be doing the innovation around the design, what we should do, and giving feedback about whether something's good or not. If I had my dream role, it would be with a team of talented developers and saying, make it do this, and it just happens with me not having to write anything down. A developer in the world who's in things, not even some of the best people we've worked with, not even Franco, who you can just say something to and it happens. You still need to write something down for them to work with. And if I can get better at that writing down, I'll be a very happy man.
Okay. So this comes right back, circles right back into, we were talking about earlier on, that you're now the Chief Technology Innovation
Officer. Yep.
Officer. How is that different from the CTO?
So when I was CTO, I was in charge of both our product and our engineering teams. So it's what should we build next and how should we build it? I also, unfortunately, inherited, like a lot of small company CTOs do, our internal infrastructure. And I hate doing infrastructure. It's the least interesting thing. I've got the wrong brain for it, left or right sided, whichever it is. I actually enjoy dealing with suppliers, but I'm not one to worry about what solution we should pick or to do a procurement process around picking one supplier over another one. I'd rather just buy the tools I want, like going shopping and just use them. But I do care about security. I do care about single sign-on. I do care to make sure everything's integrated. So now I don't have to worry about any of those things. I don't have to worry about what our engineering team do. I'm not worrying about what our product team is saying is next, but I'm having influence over it. So I'm saying, this is the product strategy for the next 3 years. These are the gaps in our product suite, and this is how we can achieve those. But I'm not deciding the solution. So there's a number of projects we've got going on at the moment. I'm personally working on Test Manager 1 because I feel I was the most qualified to work on it. Now there's someone more qualified, Kamal, to work on it with me. And other things are happening as well that I can't talk about, but using non-Salesforce technology to do other things. And those are really exciting because I don't know, I'm learning about, I can say technology, I'm learning about AWS, I'm learning about AWS Fargate versus Google Kubernetes. So it's stretching me in ways technically that I haven't had to think about for the last 10 years while I've been in that Salesforce bubble.
Sounds like you're heading towards your dream role very slowly, shedding off the activities that doesn't excite you and then moving and taking on things that does excite you, which is the product design and innovation.
Yeah, there is a difference. Though. You give up control of something like product, it can be frustrating that you're saying, look, this is really important. And you're being told, well, prove to me why it's important. Prove to me the total addressable market for that feature. There's no research company out there that has that information that's niche to Salesforce testing. There's no one out there that can tell you, should you improve in your product, how we handle Experience Cloud, or should we work on which industry cloud should we work on next? They all work, but which one should we add accelerators for? Do we do financial services? Seems obvious. Or do you do life sciences and healthcare? Oh, that's a difficult trade-off. Both have regulatory requirements, both very high wealth customers, very large customers. Which one do you do first? Very, very hard decision to justify.
So how do you make those sort of decisions? How does the
I can't say.
Team is okay. All right. Maybe for another episode.
Maybe another episode once I can talk about it. But at the moment I can't say because it's quite a critical area at the moment.
Okay. I was looking for a more generic answer to that, which is decision making, not as in what you focused on.
Okay. So you have to take into account your customers. What do they want? Okay. And one of the things I've been trying to put in place is improving how we survey our existing customers. How do we talk to them without annoying them too much? So I know I participate with a lot of Salesforce surveys, and it's reached a point where now I'm going, no, thanks, I don't want to do that one. I've got too many. I'm on 3 pilot programs already. And now I'm talking about something on the partner community to do with user signups and stuff. It's like, great, I'm interested in talking about it, but that's my capacity. So how do we do that with our customers and get them to tell us what they need and what they think and what they require? But also, how do we also then look at what the market's doing? So we have to look at what is important. So I was under pressure last year to do something around artificial intelligence. Oh, we must have an AI feature. Why do we need an AI feature? Because everyone else has one. Why does everyone else have one? because it increases the value to their investors. Okay. So what you're telling me is everyone else has done a full machine learning, all their data is pulled centrally, and they're using that information to improve the testing for their customers. Oh no, they're not doing that. So what are they doing? They're doing self-healing. Why are they doing self-healing? Because their locators are brittle. We don't have that problem. Okay. They're doing natural language processing. Why are they doing natural language processing? Because no one can read the test results. Right. We don't have that problem. Okay. So why should we do AI in testing? And now there is a thing I spoke about recently on a event. AI in testing needs to be this future vision where you have a piece of code that's written by a test, okay, or the code writes the test. They need to go hand in hand. The problem with testing and development is they happen independently. So if we can somehow have something that does both, that I can write a test and it will generate me some code, test-driven development to the extreme, or I write some code and I automatically have all my tests generated for me that spots all the weaknesses in it. So that, for me, that mutation testing is what really needs to happen for AI in testing. Everything else, if it's not mutation testing for me, is a distraction and just someone trying to raise their share price.
Wow, sorry, you just said something that kind of blew my head apart. Just a conversation with my kids about the dimensions, first, second, third dimension, and then fourth dimension. This is just,
Fifth.
Yes. So I think I'm going to need some time for my brain to catch up there.
Well, the computing power required is going to stretch even all those Bitcoin mining servers, and that's the concern. So while we could do all these things, is it morally justified to spend enormous amounts of computing power, energy, and resources on doing something instead of a human doing it? There's a price point where you go, well, I've got a great idea. Let's employ a human to do it. They're far better at doing AI than computers are. Oh, yeah, that's true.
On that note, this has been such a very stimulating conversation. I've not enjoyed conversation at this technical level. I'll call this technical for me for quite a long time. And I am quite excited to see where you're headed to next. So thank you very much, Richard, for spending time with me on this podcast.
Thank you, Pei. Thank you for listening.
I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.